Hi, welcome to the September 17th, 2014 edition of the OpenCrowbar Community Design Meeting. We meet bi-weekly. Every other week we're doing a planning meeting. Today's agenda is available on our Etherpad. See the community site for details. And we were just discussing porting bar clamps from Crowbar 1 to Crowbar 2. And recently we've had some pull requests from our community, removing transitions that are no longer relevant, that no longer exist in the bar clamp classes as parents, so the children classes should clearly not have the transitions. The transitions remain very important, but they're happening within the core and the node role graph. Any more color to that before we start at the top of the agenda?
No.
All right, awesome. So I've been hacking on Chef Metal Crowbar and having a wonderful time figuring out the Crowbar API and getting stuff done with it. I ran into an issue last night where a typical cloud provider or infrastructure provider such as Vagrant or Tog offers the client a private key, an SSH key, to use in, well, actually a key pair, a public and a private, to authenticate to the remote host that it brings to life and is selling to you, is offering to you. When you use the Amazon API, you get back at some point the private key necessary to attach to your node. We don't have that feature yet in the Crowbar API, although we are managing nodes. And then I want to discuss with the group really some workarounds right now, some suggested tasks for right now, and if we wanted to plan something a little more robust to actually add to our API for this kind of problem, or this feature. Any thoughts, guys?
I want to make sure I understand the problem and what we're trying to do for that. So the idea here is that we've got, you're setting up Chef Metal. At the end of the Chef Metal run, you need to turn over control of that node to another Chef server. And the Chef Metal does that by basically doing it does its own SSH to set up the Chef client that it's going to use. Is that right?
That's correct.
We're simulating cloud behavior.
Yeah.
Right. So cloud behavior says I can inject so does cloud behavior say I'm going to inject a public key that can be used, or does it, because I thought that was cloud behavior, good cloud behavior would be I get a VM and it has my public key in it, so I can SSH.
That's not the way Chef works. With Chef in particular, whenever you generate a new client, it saves the public key on the Chef server and hands you the private key once. And if you ever lose that private key, you're boned and you have to create a new client.
For the client, but I think the Chef Metal's working a level before that it sets up the client. So it has to SSH in to the node, set up the client, and then the Chef, then it starts using Chef after that. Is that right?
Okay, that's correct.
Okay, so it would be great if we could just set up the Chef client and be done, but Chef Metal's making it the assumption that Chef Metal's built for Amazon as a target, right? And so they're expecting just to get a raw machine without the client on it, and so they do expect to be able to put a public key in. So really, it sounds like, Judd, what you need to be able to do is add an extra public key into the known host file for root.
That's correct. You can either specify to the Chef Metal driver your key pair. It'll absolutely need a private key, so you can either generate a private key and somehow deliver to your new node the public key, or accept a key pair from the cloud management system that the Chef Metal driver will then ingest that key pair and use it to connect to these new nodes.
So the most generic.
Well, we obviously don't want to hand over the private keys that Crowbar uses to talk to us. So why not just generate a new key pair and throw the public half onto the node as something that you can SSH into as root?
All right.
Right. That would strike me as a useful role in general, right?
That's
yeah,
super.
and if you want to generalize it a little bit, you can make that a per node function. But I mean, until we have more than one thing using it, it doesn't need to be any more complicated than that. So I wouldn't worry. I wouldn't stress over it too much.
Well, wouldn't it be a new node role though? It would give you some control. But why not?
Why would you create a new node role just for that?
It would allow you to say, okay, for on this node, I want to add a public key. So you could put that would actually be an attribute for that node role. You could put the deployment role as a higher level, but as soon as you add that, then you're basically adding a new authorized user for that node. It seems like something you'd want to control. And I don't know that we want to generate the private key. It seems like if we just say, well, insert the public key into the here.
The reason that I wouldn't do that as a node role is because the reason that I wouldn't want to do that as a node role is because it has some. If you create a role just for managing private keys, or SSH public and private keys, you're going to wind up with a lot of crap that depends on it in the node role graph. And we don't care about that. We don't want to rerun everything that depends on it every time we add a new public key. It's just pointless. So make it part of the secure shell hammer that just says, go out and generate a new public and private key pair and hand them over to me. And I'll do with them what I need to do.
But that doesn't address the use case where somebody already has a private key and they're just giving you the public.
Yeah, we don't give a shit about that use case.
I can see a lot of utility for that use case.
From what I understand, is the use case that Judd is getting at specifically, and correct me if I'm wrong, but what Chef Metal expects us to hand over to it is the private half of a key pair that you can use to SSH into a node as root.
I thought it was expecting the public half. Judd?
You can work with either. Chef Metal is perfectly capable of generating new key pairs and offering the public side to the API, the Crowbar API, in this example, and we can write whatever we need to write in Crowbar to make that public key land on the node that we're controlling. Sure, it's just not in the Crowbar API yet, and that's why I brought it up. If we implement it as a node role.
Okay. Well, it just seems like I wouldn't implement that as a node role. I just implement it as I would implement it as part of the secure shell hammer. Just add a method to it that says add key. I'll go over the
and then store it as an attribute. And then store it over as an attribute.
You're thinking too much, Rob.
That's what I always do. Good. Pull me back from the edge, please. All right, let's. But I think what we do want to do is track this as an item in the issues list. So I'll add it. But yeah, I do see use cases for people who want to say, all right, I want to be able to access these things outside of Crowbar. I don't want to use Crowbar's private key. I want to inject my own public key onto the nodes so I can access them. And that makes perfect. And I would think that could even be a node by node thing, because you might be handing over this node. I hesitate to say it, but bare metal as a service. One of the things you would do is you would inject the end user's key onto that node as for control access.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see this as actually a very popular use case.
And the easiest way to do that is to And the easiest way to do that is to add a method to the secure shell hammer that just says, oh, inject this public key as something that can inject this public key into root's authorized key file on this node.
But you would just do that as like a hammer? You would just do that as a hammer? Okay. And then so it can happen out of band and it doesn't need to be passed through the whole work queue.
So on my line 9 of the Etherpad, does that make sense? Is that what you're talking about?
Hang on, my computer kicked him.
So, you don't need to keep... Go ahead.
No, I was just reading it. Add a method to the hammer classes that injects the authorized key file.
Yeah, I mean, we don't have to work on all the details here.
Well, it's a design call, so it's worth understanding a little bit about what's going on.
We can get some lift by stealing from Chef. They've already written all this remote access transport stuff that can use SSH or the Microsoft way of connecting to nodes. I know Windows nodes are not really on our immediate roadmap, but we're going to get there. So it's an aside that I'd like to talk about at a different design meeting, driving Windows nodes.
But this actually exposes a question I have about the hammers, which is that what happens if the method doesn't complete? Right. The nice thing about the node role queue is that it's guaranteed completion or failure. What happens if you make this hammer request and it tries to execute?
And it can't? It fails.
Yeah, it fails.
And the API returns a call saying it failed.
Okay. That's good. That's enough then. So it's a synchronous call. The hammers are synchronous, is what you're saying. Node rails are asynchronous.
Yeah, hammers are pretty much synchronous.
Okay. I personally, I think that that's a fine way to do it. Then you're just saying, hey, look, inject this key onto the system. We have a way to do it. We do it. You find out if it worked. It's your challenge to wait for the return. That's fine.
Yep.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and add a feature request for Room 2 for this then.
Okay.
And you were saying that's from the SSH hammer?
Yeah.
Okay. The shammer. Okay. I'll put together the milestone. I don't know what number it'll be yet. Okay, so initially it's just root. All right, sorry. Let's keep going. I'm working out the story while we continue. It's actually a nice tie-in because we could talk about hammers as a part of this.
Yeah, that's the since Greg's not really around to talk about pulse stacks, we can go to the hammer update.
Yeah, since Greg's not here. Yeah.
Greg, according to the post, Greg thinks he's got the salt stack pieces going, and I'm working to set up a meeting where we can actually get feedback from the salt team directly about whether or not that works and how and what they see with it. So,
okay.
my expectation
the poll he had out. So.
Cool. And we should get a demo next week is my expectation. Or I'll do one and we'll post a video. It should be just as good. Well, not just as good, but useful. And what my expectation is, that's an MVP or proof of concept version, and we're looking for customers to fund the additional development on it and build it out fully. So, as always, there's work that we start in Crowbar, develop it to proof of concept, and then look for sponsors to help fund its completion and full integration. So I think we're at that point with the salt stack work.
All right, let's talk about the Hammer updates, the RAID changes. Victor, if you're near a computer, you can also grab control and give a little tour, or tell me where to go.
Well, grabbing control will be a little bit tricky because it's my usual. I do all my work on Linux stuff and join new stuff for that sort of thing.
Right. That's stuck for Linux. You're correct.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, this is why I'd kind of prefer if we move to just using Hangouts for this sort of thing.
Same here.
But anyway, we've gone back and forth on this a few billion times.
It's actually a pretty reasonable thing to do. I think we're getting about there. I expect Dale's been sponsoring this Join Me session, and I suspect we will let it lapse in the next couple of weeks. Just makes it harder for people who are phone only to join.
Why?
Can you dial into a Join Me Hangout?
Oh, yeah. You can.
Oh, I haven't tried that yet. All right, let me try it. No, we'll just switch over.
The main blocker was that it didn't work from behind Dell's firewall.
Oh, we don't care about
that. That's rapidly becoming not an issue.
So, Victor, if there's any, for the benefit of the audience at home, oh, thank you. I'm opening up his PR for requests for the uninitiated. Don't merge yet.
Yeah, this is totally I want copious amounts of feedback on how I'm doing this.
That's what the meeting's
for. Yep. Oh my, you're gonna hate me for this.
Which Rob used?
The short version is I lifted the libraries that we were using to talk to the RAID controllers out of Chef and kind of packaged them up into their own thing. That should probably be turned into a gym at some point, but life was too short for now. And instead of using Chef to control instead of using Chef to manage the volumes, the thing we use Chef for is to install the tools, which is right now Mega CLI and SAS IRCU. And we have a jig. We have a jig that node roles can talk to query information about the RAID controllers and make changes to their configuration. And we also have a hammer that does all the low-level SSHing into the node and running the relevant commands.
Okay. Interesting. So there's a jig for it. The jig uses the hammer, the SSH hammer.
Yeah.
Effectively.
That's the pattern that basically all the jigs use these days.
Oh, makes perfect sense. Yeah.
The jig delegates to the relevant hammer.
Okay. So that's consistent with the design, which says that the node roll graph is asynchronous and the hammers are synchronous, and so you would make synchronous calls inside of the protection of the annealer. Okay. So Chef.
Yeah.
When you say you're only using Chef to install the tools, so that makes sense because Chef handles the dependency graphs and the OS differences really well. And then you actually SSH in a separate call to then actually run the CLI tools instead of using Chef to do it?
Yeah. Once the tools are installed, I know where they were installed to, and so I just say SSH into the node, run this command with this parameters, and mark back the output, and I'll parse it here.
Okay. And then that would be, if we wanted to switch that to an out-of-band mechanism for a different model of gear, then that would be relatively straightforward to do that shift. Does that line up with the quirks table from that perspective?
Quirks are a separate mechanism. For now, there are the main advantage of doing things in band right now is that the out-of-band methods that we have tend to do nasty things like reboot systems.
Okay.
So, like, for instance, if you're going to manage RAID arrays via the lifecycle controller, if I remember correctly, it actually wants to reboot the system into the lifecycle controller to doink around with your volumes.
Okay. Yeah.
But if you do it in band, you can make changes on the fly, and the volumes basically just appear when the command is finished running.
How do you
do things like
with this? Go ahead. Like what?
So you can do things like create RAID volumes, at point of need instead of having to have them pre-created. Like the roles themselves can take over. Oh, hey, this thing has the roles themselves can say, oh, there are RAID controllers there. I know I'm going to need this many volume, so I'm going to create them with the appropriate RAID layout that I want.
And then it talks to the RAID controllers. It does that on the fly. So walk me through the initial bring up, because first you're doing this after the OS has been installed on the first RAID drive or the first disk volume, right? So something has to go in and say, I need a RAID 1 mirror for the first 2 drives, and then to install the OS on that.
I haven't gotten to that part, but the way that would work is the provisioner OS install role. So one thing that happens is roles get called every time a node changes.
Right.
And that includes when you bind new node roles to it. So the provisioner OS install role will get called whenever we discover
you're turning into IP chatter, by the way.
Array. It's called every time we do anything happen, pretty much. And whenever we discover a new RAID controller.
Victor, you're breaking up in a bad way.
Okay, it's not just me. Victor, you're 2/3 of the packets. I think we just lost Victor. So this is really, it's really a nice evolution of the design. I'll try and summarize, although I'd rather have Victor be able to say I'm summarizing correctly. What's going on is that we're starting to treat the disks more discreetly, and so when the system goes back, it can look at what's available in the system and then make assignments of those RAID arrays afterwards. What I don't know yet is how we're showing those allocations being done. So it's pretty straightforward in a rehearsed. Those are supposed to be rehearsed.
Hey, sorry about that.
No worries. I was just adding. I was trying to summarize, right? When the disks are allocated back, you were explaining how you know which ones are available or not, I think.
Well, I mean, the RAID controller knows what all volumes it has and what all disks it has. So
Okay.
and one of the things that I'm requiring is that every volume has a unique name. And so far, the RAID controllers that we've talked to, they allow you to give names to volumes. And so if the provisioner or OS install role notices that there's no volumes named OS or whatever, it'll just create a volume with that name with the RAID parameters that are appropriate for the system. If you have enough,
what would happen if you'd run it before and it already existed?
Then it noticed that it already existed and wouldn't do anything right now.
That's awesome. Okay. Will we have a basically a reset the dominoes command in there somewhere?
Yeah.
Okay.
I mean, the driver has, or the controllers have a clear config method. You just poke it and it zaps everything.
Okay. That, from a test perspective, that'll both modes will be very useful. I'm sure you've already hit that. So.
Yeah. And one of the enhancements that I made going forward is that the roles themselves don't have to concern themselves with the details of what disks are permissible to add to what arrays, because there are some per controller restrictions that apply. Like you can't mix SAS and SATA disks, and you generally can't mix SSDs and non-SSD disks.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I've set it up so that all the controllers have whenever you're creating a virtual disk, all you have to do is pass in the type of RAID you want, what name you want to call it, how many disks you want it to have, and optionally the total size you want the RAID volume to be. And it'll figure everything else out on its own.
Okay, so there's a huge piece of what you've just described. And we have the same benefits on the network side too. Is that if you've asked for something and given it a name, then that's created a functional handoff to things downstream. So if you wanted to build a Ceph volume that had a cache tier and a journaling tier, you could say, the RAID node roles would say, oh yeah, hey, I just built this thing, I called it cache, or Ceph cache, more likely. And then the Ceph cache node roles, when it came along, would go say, all right, I now, I'll bake in that I have an assumption that I have a volume called Ceph cache and just use that, right? It's this loosely coupled system from that perspective. Is that right?
I haven't gotten that far yet.
Okay.
Mostly because I don't want the actual roles themselves I don't want to bake in the assumption. I don't want the roles to bake in the assumption that there will always be a RAID controller. Otherwise, that makes testing a gigantic pain.
No, but they should be able to bake in that there is they should bake in the assumption that there is a volume that's appropriately named if they need it. Or I guess they could say, oh, I don't have a cache, and then pivot around the cache set up for that.
Yeah. And the details of whether or not to, the details of how to handle that complexity is still kind of up in the air.
Yeah.
But
it feels to me like we're getting closer to it.
Yeah.
Right.
I mean, for now, things are still set up so that we still have a RAID configure role, and we can still, do like we did in Crowbar 1 and just, say, oh, this system's going to be one gigantic RAID pin, or oh, hey, it's going to be all JBOD,
right,
and let it work that way. And that's the way we were working in the past.
Makes sense.
I just have the underlying
machinery. My experience
machinery
has been. Sorry, go ahead.
We just now have the underlying machinery to be able to not have to do it that way.
Right. And what I've seen is with Hadoop and Ceph and even OpenStack to an extent now, having a more variable disk configuration option is important. And it's very differentiated as far as I can tell from anything else. But actually, the whole hammer architecture is pretty different. Interesting.
Oh yeah. Yeah. Sadly, though, that command thing won't be able to carry over to the BIOS stuff because that basically has to be done out of band. I don't know if BIOSes that'll let you turn off the ability to have virtualization while you're actually running inside the operating system.
Yeah. I think there are some settings that you could do and some that you can't, but hopefully they shouldn't require reboot. Virtualization, I'm almost certain, would require reboot, wouldn't it?
Yeah, especially if you happen to have virtualization modules loaded already. That could cause things to go a little explodey.
Yeah, no, we'll have to get there.
Yeah. So the BIOS stuff will probably continue to be more of a, more of an out of band or you have to pre-configure it that way type of thing.
We need a term for the sledgehammer band stuff because we have this in band that's happening now. I mean, we're finally splitting it, right? We have in band that's happening at the installed OS. We have pre-in band that's happening in Sledgehammer, and then we have out of band that's happening against the BMC controllers. And I don't know what to call that intermediate thing.
Yeah. Well, on your notes, the other in-band advantage is it's safe and it's immediate.
Yes. Oh, it's a big deal to be able to leave the disks unallocated until you actually.
But you don't have that typed into the. You don't have that. That's not typed into the path.
Typed into the path? What do you mean?
The ether path.
Oh. Okay. No, I think Judd gave up typing. Let's see.
Oh, okay.
Capture. Running out of time.
Yeah, I did give up typing.
No, it's a lot of dense information. It'd be hard to recapture it. There's a nomenclature issue. C-L-A-T-U-R-E. You're the speller, Judd, not me. So otherwise, I was close. Huh?
Mm-hmm.
So we have a question. We have in-band. We've had this conversation before. I think we resolved what in-band, what out-of-band was. Oops, if I could do that right. Out-of-band. And then there's the sledgehammer band. This is really the pre-configuration. But you don't just do it during pre-configuration. You do it so we understand what this is in the target OS.
Isn't this more of a discovery?
Yeah, it's discovery. It's discovery band. Except there are times when we would go back to Sledgehammer that weren't discovery.
We don't need to have this conversation right now.
Battle of the bands. Thank you. No, we don't. We don't have to resolve it right now. We do. In describing how Crowbar works to people, I need to be able to explain in-band, out-of-band, and sideband. Why don't we just call it, let's be simple. We'll call it sideband and we'll be done. You okay with that, Victor?
It's mostly irrelevant detail. I mean, the relevant point is that we converge to a known state by walking the no-roll graph.
It's irrelevant because you understand it. I tried to explain it to people who don't.
Well, okay, the point of having the no-roll graph, of having an asynchronous graph, is that we could also have it use synchronous events, that the children of the asynchronous graph can be synchronous events. Right? The whole point has been being able to wrap up eventual convergence and things that are not well synchronized into a system that can rationalize these things.
Yeah.
I actually like calling it sideband.
Band on the run?
Well, the thing is, I think when you start talking about in-band versus out-of-band, you add additional confusion without actually resolving anything.
Right.
Then we just need, I need better words then.
Probably.
It's a differentiator. It's
a
a really big differentiator. It's a really big differentiator because if you're using Chef, Chef only can operate in band. And since Crowbar's design allows us to treat a node, have multiple control points on a node, it creates an orchestration advantage that you need in physical operations that you don't need actually in, I mean, OpenStack, if you want to think about it that way, is effectively this big sideband thing for controlling nodes. But,
It is.
it's all sticky.
And then you throw IPv6 in it, and everybody's all confused.
Yeah, then everyone.
I was talking to one of our earlier Crowbar friends about what they've been up to, and they're fighting IPv6 and OVS. It's both things that we have experience with, so I'll see if there's a way for us to be able to help them.
Okay. Well.
There, that's neither here. You threw in IPv6, and so I wandered off the reservation.
Oh no.
I mean, this is because we've hit exactly what we want to talk about in our design call.
Yeah, unless you want to go into implementation details, which you probably don't.
To the extent that we need to, I think that it's very important that we can explain these design we can review the design concepts here, talk about them so that people can see what's going on. We have the history so you can point somebody back, although it's a little chaotic in explanation. But then I need to be able to go and explain it at a higher level concept to people who are trying to understand what Crowbar does relative to, say, Foreman or relative to Cobbler or things like that. So, and I definitely need to be able to describe the different ways that we talk to nodes.
Yeah, that's really, really important because people don't just want another tool that does exactly the same thing as all their other tools.
Correct. Okay. Judd, other topics, or we good to wrap up?
I think that's wrapping up. We're going to return to the topic when we have better terminology for what is in the null role graph, what parts of Crowbar are not in the null role graph, and what purposes they serve. Seems just about everything gets hooked onto the node role graph but has different properties. Synchronous rates. That's it. So I'll wrap it up here. This has been the September 17th, 2014 OpenCrowbar design call. Hope you guys got something out of it. And you can find us in our mailing list, OpenCrowbar, that Google is hosting. And thanks so much for listening.